Real quick, before we get into the show, I wanted to share a new service called Getita that Ken and I have been using that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?
There are different things, whether it's just a big hug from somebody that's around you, or, taking a short walk out in nature. Maybe there's a certain food that you just love that makes you feel really healthy and nourished. Maybe at the end of the day, if you've had, 6 glasses of water with a great lemon in them, there's simple things you can do that make you feel like you're really nourishing yourself. Some people may set up sacred space outside. You may have a great place in your backyard or by a fire, or, there's lots of places. And I really even think you can have sacred space even on a favorite trail that you may walk. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somewhere where you're still, but it means surrounding yourself with things that are supportive to you. What is the first thing when a child is born, when a baby is born? What's the first thing they do when they enter into the world? They take a breath. So our breath is really our most powerful piece of nourishment that we can possibly have. And it's available to everyone.
Welcome everyone to the Firing the Man podcast, a show for anyone who wants to be their own boss. If you sit in a cubicle every day and know you are capable of more, then join us. This show will help you build a business and grow your passive income streams in just a few short hours per day. And now your hosts, serial entrepreneurs David Schomer and Ken Wilson.
Welcome, everyone, to the Firing the Man podcast. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of interviewing Catherine Farley, an accomplished author, speaker, physical therapist, and wellness coach. On this episode, we will be discussing her new book, Desert to Dawn, Reflections to Inspire, Refresh, and Renew. We will be diving into topics such as stress management, dealing with anxiety-provoking situations, and how not dealing with these types of issues can take a toll on your mental health as well as your physical wellness. Welcome to the show, Catherine.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here with y'all today.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. So to kind of set the scene for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey from physical therapy into being an author into being a wellness coach?
It's a long journey, but I'll try to be concise. So my formal education, I have my master's degree in physical therapy. And that was over 20 years ago that I achieved that goal and just loved learning about the human body, and came out of school and worked in a big trauma center, actually here in Charlotte, North Carolina, and saw all kinds of things. Wonderful experience. Parlayed into doing some work as a clinical education director at the hospital. So I worked with all the students that came through, which was a wonderful experience as well, and learned that I really did like to wear the education hat a lot in that role. And then kind of paused, and we had 3 children. And so I was at home a decent amount with the children and did some work, had some doors that opened for me to do some private work with some physical therapy clients that I had met actually in the hospital. So that was perfect for where I was as a new mom. And I worked, 4 or 5 hours a week, and really that was the beginning of my life as, if you want to call it, an entrepreneur, of having my own business. And it really just happened serendipitously. I didn't have the goal of doing that, but I recognized that for where we were in our lives with our family and the role that I wanted to have as a mom, it just really worked well. So I was really fortunate on that front and could dive into doing that work. So in doing that, I was always supportive of my husband's business. He's a general contractor. And about 10 years ago, we faced just a really upheaval in his business. And we were in litigation for about 3 years with an surety company. an international security company, and we were a small family business. So needless to say, it really, really rocked our worlds. And from that, I had a really challenging season where I dealt with severe anxiety and panic disorder and was ultimately diagnosed with PTSD. I was medicated and then had problems getting off the medicine. It was just really a vicious storm. And coming out of that, I feel so incredibly fortunate that I discovered all kinds of resources to take care of the body, even more so than I had learned in physical therapy school. So I, at this juncture, just feel really empowered to share those with people. And as a side note, wearing the mom hat, this is really how my author journey began. My kids, we spent a lot of time at the coast and we just loved exploring mostly at the South Carolina coast. And when the children were really little, when we would go places, we would always collect books of the places we visited. So when we'd come home, we'd be able to read and have all kinds of memories about our experiences in these new places. And our children were very headstrong in saying, well, there's not a book about this one in particular island that we just love. Why isn't there a book? And curiosity seems to be the motherhood of lots of interesting things in our lives. And so we ended up writing a little story together one spring break, and different windows began to open. And we met an artist and we met a gentleman who had self-published a few books. And it just seemed like the path was very clear that this was something that we needed to do and a project we needed to take on. And so we did. And that's where my confidence as a writer started to be established. And, I decided I'm going to take some writing courses and just really learn more about the trade. And so something totally unexpected really came to fruition from these questions that my children posed. And so it's just been a fun journey of writing and sharing. And that's really how I see myself as an author, is just being able to share interesting life experiences with others and hopefully inspiring people that creativity really is a beautiful thing in your life if you feel inspired to be creative. So that's kind of where I am. And so I've just within the last year and a half, I've started doing workshops and doing some speaking engagements on the wellness component. And it's really the merging of my background in science and physical therapy and the beauty of neuroplasticity, which we can get into talking about that a little bit with the mind, and the intersection of my faith and then my hard-earned experiences from 10 years ago. So that's really how kind of the culmination of all the different hats that I wear have interestingly intersected here. And it's kind of a fun time.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to digging into this. And I think, we're all seeking to be well-rounded, right? And I think that the wellness piece in mental health, at least in our profession, I see it all the time with friends of the podcast or colleagues. That is a piece that's neglected. So Ken, I'm going to kick it over to you for the next question, but I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And welcome, Catherine. And thanks for, sharing your story. It's very inspirational. And, kind of like what David mentioned, looking at the notes prior to the show, and I was checking it out, and I'm like, we have in this world of entrepreneurs and e-commerce, we're constantly what we kind of coined grinding. We're working, we're just pushing really hard. A lot of entrepreneurs have full-time jobs or they have multiple businesses. And so I would say I'm guilty of this, and I'm certain David is as well, is sometimes we even take pride in grinding, and saying, oh, I got all this accomplished and I did all this. But a lot of times it's at the expense of something else, is, mental health and physical health and anxiety and everything else. It kind of is a detriment. So can you speak to that a little bit and maybe give some tips and tricks on what you found to be kind of helpful and kind of being well-rounded, and taking care of yourself better?
Well, you're so right, Ken, in sharing that eventually the body does keep the score is what I like to think about. And I'm using that term that was coined by a physician, Dr. Vanderkolk, who has a great book out that talks about how eventually the stresses and what I like to think of as cumulative micro trauma on our body which is the result of the cumulative stress, the body will eventually call out. And that's probably where I was when I turned 40. And we had some unusual circumstances that were not the norm of most people's lives, but everyone has different circumstances that are not the norm of everyone else's lives, whether it be challenges within their family with health or financial challenges or other stressors that, are presented into our lives. So I really think that focusing on establishing a unique routine or rhythm that works for you is the key component. And really knowing that taking a pause and noticing what is really life-giving for you. And that can be different for different people. Some people really need heavy cardiovascular exercise to really flush out a lot of the anxiety and energy that their body seems to build up. And other people need a lot more calming exercise, the yogas and the meditation and that sort of thing. For me, I find that I kind of need a combination of the two. I find that the importance of recognizing your needs is where the answer lies. And once you can figure out kind of what makes you tick and what makes you be the best version of you, then you've discovered the secret to maintaining your wellness so that you can be the best of you for everybody else. But first, I think we have to go interior into ourselves and recognize, what are my deepest held beliefs? How do I support those? What does my system need from me? Does my system need better nutrition? Does my system need more time outdoors? Does my system need more reflective time where I'm reading and writing? There's just lots of different ways that we can take care of our bodies that don't involve medication. And, of course, there are situations where medication is the best alternative. But as a medical provider, I like to focus on what are the things that we can do most simply without adding another layer into our bodies. So that's kind of where I come from in terms of recommendations. I like to think of 3 different things. Care of yourself allows you to be the best version of you. And if you are not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anything else well. You can't take care of your businesses. You can't take care of your spouse or your girlfriend or your children or the other important people in your life. And for me, faith has been a huge part of my journey because it's really provided a lot of resolve for me to follow an intended path. I mean, it's a checkpoint for me and it's a guidepost. And so that's something that I've relied upon. And also knowing that faith is just the belief in something bigger than you being in control. And oftentimes, I think entrepreneurs and people that are driven in that direction like to have control over things in their lives. And I think that's, a fine balance that we have to attend to. And then really just a simple thought of really know what brings you joy and peace each day. There are different things, whether it's just a big hug from somebody that's around you or, taking a short walk out in nature. Maybe there's a certain food that you just love that makes you feel really healthy and nourished. Maybe at the end of the day, if you've had, 6 glasses of water with a great lemon in them, like that's just feels there's simple things you can do that make you feel like you're really nourishing yourself. So those are the things that I really like to think about when I'm working with individuals and tailoring things, to their unique bodies and their unique minds. I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's such a great answer. And one thing I would like to highlight for the listeners is, Catherine, you brought up a good point. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your family, your business, your relationships. And so oftentimes that, for me, that connection piece wasn't there for a really long time. And I always thought, I can just get through this. I can get through this. But yeah, I really want to emphasize that. Like if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of anything else. So that was excellent. David, over to you.
Yeah, I also just want to highlight another piece is that approach is very proactive. And you see it all the time in corporate America where people are chasing their tail. They're concerned about the next deadline, the next big case, and they are not stopping to ask themselves simple questions like, what makes me happy? And really are living life in a reactive mode. And so I really like that answer. Now, talking about physical therapy and how I read in your book, you say the process of physical therapy, identify problems, setting forth a plan, and working towards a plausible outcome. And that seems like very logical framework. And so how has that helped you as you have been acting as a wellness coach?
Well, I think the big thing for me is we have to pause, right? We have to look at where we are in this time and really notice what things are troublesome, what things are really calling out from within our bodies that need attention. And then naming those things. First, you have to name them and you have to put them on paper or bring them into the conversation. And once they're named, then you create a reasonable goal, something that is very doable. And it's a lot of times they're just simple things that you can change. Maybe you get up 15 minutes earlier in the morning and have a little bit of time where you can reflect, or knowing that there's a routine that you can establish and feeling good about accomplishing, a couple of small tasks that lead to a bigger goal. And I think often that's where people can be challenged is we have lofty goals, but being able to break down the goals into smaller increments is very important. And often that is something that I help people to do is breaking the goals down.
Awesome. So in the book, there's a section that's called Creating Your Sacred Space. And I want to kind of talk about that a little bit. Can you share maybe some examples of your sacred space and maybe some items that you included in there? And then how can the listeners go about kind of designing their space?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. One of the things I love is bringing the outdoors in. And I think that we can do that in our homes very easily with color, with textures, with plants, even with different items that you can have sitting inside. So to give y'all a sneak peek, my sacred space is actually in our living room. So it's in the front of our house and there's great light in there. There's 3 big windows. The backdrop is kind of a really pale color. It's a grayish color. And I love to enliven the space with, artwork and things that are vibrant to me. And then I have some pictures in there of family and friends and those kind of special moments that when you look at the picture, it just you go right back to that spot where it was taken and you remember those great feelings of joy. I have a heightened sense to smell as well. And so I love to have a favorite candle in there that I can light because that just sets the scene as well. And then a comfortable chair and in the wintertime, a blanket. Like I just really layer it up with all my favorites. And I have to be honest, when I first started establishing that space, it was really interesting because we have a dog and our dog has an affinity, of course, for our children. Their ages 18 and 16 and 13, especially for my 13-year-old son. I mean, they're just, 2 peas in a pod. But I'll tell you, when I am sitting in that room, no matter what's going on in the house, our dog comes in there and just sits right beside me. And I think animals really have a sense of yearning for peace and yearning for just a groundedness. I think they have a lot of interesting innate characteristics about them. And I think that speaks volumes to what goes on in that space. And I use that space to just reflect. I use that space often to write. I'm a Christian, and so I have the Bible in there, and I like to read scripture and reflect on that as well. So I think there's a variety of ways that you can set it up. Some people may set up sacred space outside. You may have a great place in your backyard or by a fire, or there's lots of places. And I really even think you can have sacred space even on a favorite trail that you may walk. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somewhere where you're still, but it means surrounding yourself with things that are supportive to you and make you feel empowered. And it's just a good practice. And I have to be honest, sometimes I crave it. At the end of the day, I'm just craving like that that chair. Like I know exactly what it feels like. And I'll go and sit in there for, 3 or 4 minutes, and it's a complete reset. And I can, continue on with the evening with, preparing dinner and doing all the things that you do in the evening with 3 teen children, which can be a lot of different things. So it's just a really great spot. And often my children will come and sit in there with me if they want to have just kind of a conversation that's a deeper conversation. We'll go and sit in that space. And it just seems to be a space that brings a lot of good, I'll say. So
I like that. That's awesome. But one thing that I don't do more of, I'm gonna improve on that like today, is the smell. Like I've been trying to create in my office that space that you describe, like where I look at things and it makes me feel good and it makes me calm and comfortable. But yeah, I have some plants and some other stuff, but candles, I don't have anything like that. So I think that maybe we'll take it to the next level. But yeah, that is so important. I think having a space like that is like an escape, is like it just kind of frees you up a little bit. And for anybody on the YouTube channel, if you can see right here, I have a new addition to the office. It is a Ragnar Lothbrok Viking battle axe that's on my wall, and that makes me happy. So that was my addition. David, do you have any shout outs for your space?
Yeah. So right over my right shoulder, I have Teddy Roosevelt riding a moose, and I've talked about, it's well documented on the podcast, but the speech is called "The Man in the Arena." And when I read that, I've read it probably 100 times. The hair on my neck still stands up. I love that. And so that's something that bounces between the podcast studio and my office, and pictures of family, good sense. I think it's particularly relevant to people that, if you look at the way jobs have changed, a lot of people are sitting in a desk. And I would say 100 years ago, that probably wasn't as much the case. And so, taking a little bit of extra time and thinking about lighting or thinking about smells, it's really important. And I have found that the more comfortable my space is, the better I am able to work and perform. And so it's kind of a performance thing as well. So I really am glad that you included that in your book. And Ken and I probably on a weekly basis are talking about how we're, creating our sacred space and making it better.
that's awesome. I love seeing your mantras right behind you. That's a great way of doing it. I'm learning from y'all as well.
There we go.
So thanks.
There we go. Sorry to interrupt the episode. You may have heard Ken and I talking recently about a new tool that we're using for Amazon refunds. Now, I have used other refund tools like this. However, I can tell you in the first 7 days, they scrubbed the back end of my Amazon account going back 18 months and found $5,000 of refunds. And the nice thing about this is it's my money. Amazon made a mistake and they are just auditing my account. The other thing I really like about this tool is there is no monthly fee. They only charge a commission if they are successful in getting you your money. Go to Getida.com, Getida, and enter promo code FTM for Firing the Man, FTM400. This is an awesome tool. Can't say enough good things about it. Now, back to the episode.
So, Catherine, you have some incredible stats in your book on how the average human has 80,000 thoughts per day, most of which are not documented. What has been your experience with clients that start journaling, writing, and reflecting?
It's really interesting. I'd love to give you a little background. We mentioned the word neuroplasticity earlier. And the amazing thing that we've discovered in, the scientific studies of the brain over the last, 25 to 30 years is that neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change according to what input we place into the brain. So it's really impactful knowing that you can bring new thoughts, you can bring new processes into the brain, and it changes it. You're not the way you are for forever. And so I think that the beauty of that is knowing that if you are in a situation where, you're very challenged and you're not liking what we call the ruminating thoughts that are going through your head, a lot of people have negative self-talk, right? And I think the power of knowing that you can get rid of that negative self-talk and bring in positive self-talk, there's tremendous hope and potential in that. And that's because of the neuroplasticity of the brain. So an interesting thing also, when you look at the anatomy of the brain, there's something called a homunculus. And it's a picture, it's a depicted picture of all the different body parts, like your foot, your hand, your arm, your stomach. And they take the side of the cortex of the brain, a cross section of the brain, and they show you how much of the cortex, so how much of your brain power, if you will, is devoted to different parts of the body. And I would challenge you to guess which part of the body you think takes up the largest part of the brain cortex. You guys have any guesses?
I'm going to say hands.
Yes.
The
Yes.
hands? Okay.
Your hand.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really incredible to think about what we do with our hands. So what we take in with our hands and what we put out with our hands has a tremendous impact on our brains. So it's really interesting to think about how writing, even typing, how that affects our brain. So when we talk about the different things that we can express through our writing and how that can be therapeutic with what we're doing with our hands, there's a lot of value in that. So it's very interesting to think about. There's a physician, James Pennebaker, who is a psychiatrist researcher. He's actually here in the Carolinas, and he does a lot of research on this whole topic of writing to heal. And he has found tremendous biological effects with the immune system, with the cardiovascular system, with a lot of important systems within our body, that the simple practice of writing, expressive writing, can help with and improve those biological systems in our bodies. So it's pretty neat stuff, actually. And going back to just how the brain, with all of these thoughts, when you think about a higher percentage of these thoughts being negative self-talk, and that's just the human nature, when we can transition those to positive self-talk, our potential is just magnified. And again, we go back to the first thing that we talked about. It's when you're able to take care of yourself in these positive ways, what you can do out in the world is tremendous. There's just greater potential.
So I have a follow-up question to the journaling. And back in college, I read a book called Checklist Manifesto, which written by a guy named Atul Gawande. And he just talks about how a simple checklist makes people so much more effective. They talk about pilots and how checklists are needed in medicine. And that book, really had a big impact on me, so much so that you will likely find my to-do list within 5 feet of me most of my waking hours a day. I carry around a leather notebook. And so if you were to give me a blank piece of paper, and Ken, I know you're guilty of this too, because if you were to give us the blank piece of paper and say, write, we would make a checklist of to-do items. And I don't think that is, it's somewhat therapeutic in that it kind of empties them, gets them out of your brain in somewhere. But that was one thing I really liked about Desert to Dawn, it is that there are some prompting questions for the journaling. And so for someone that has never done it, what would be some practical advice you'd offer to them to get that maximum therapy benefit and not just be creating a to-do list for themselves?
Well, first, I am an avid list maker as well. So I think there's tremendous value in making a list, because I think when we go back to talking about goals, I think it sets priorities and you can really accomplish a lot through making a list. And I think that's a very important practice. But I will say, merging the interesting part of reflective questioning is something that kind of counterbalances that list making. And to be honest, David and Ken, I wasn't a natural reflective thinker 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. My challenging life experiences really put me in a place where I needed to do that kind of work, because I noticed that all the thoughts that were going through my head were negative, and they were negative ruminating thoughts, and they were filled with fear and worry. And so what I had to do was I would begin just writing down the thoughts that were keeping me awake at night, the thoughts that were interrupting me during the day. Those were the things that I needed to purge from my mind. And so that's where I started. And I think that's a great starting place for most people, because I think if you ask any human being in a moment, if they could reflect on their prior 24 hours, they could choose something that kept popping up and pinging them throughout that prior 24 hours, whether it was the thought before they went to bed or, whatever that worry, or I like to say concern is, get it on paper and kind of write about it. And often you'll flush out what's not really important. And maybe there's one thing in there that you need to address,
Nice.
But the majority of it is probably just stuff that's clogging up space in your brain. And when we can open up that valuable space in our minds for other things that are positive and that are life-giving, then, the growth is just exponential. So I really think that's the best place to start, is just ask yourself, what keeps pinging me? What thought keeps pinging me during the day and interrupting my train of thought? Or what thought is, unfortunately, maybe waking you up at night, which is really when it's becoming pervasive. What's keeping me awake at night? That's where you need to start. That's what you need to start writing. And truthfully, I always tell people, get an ugly notebook. Like, this is not stuff you're going to look back at and read again. You get it out of your mind. And so it doesn't have to make any sense. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. No one's going to read it. Nobody's going to look at it for proper punctuation. You just get it out of your mind. And then you've got all that awesome space for all the good stuff that's going on. So that's where you can start.
I like it. And I like the fact that you mentioned, like, don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about it being messy. I think just kind of spilling your thoughts on paper. I like that. So turning the page a little bit, I want to talk about breath work, and I am going to eat crow on this. And if my brother's listening, he is probably smiling ear to ear on this. So a little bit of backstory. My brother a year ago took some breath work classes, and him and I are wired very similarly. And he called me and he said, David, you need to do this. And I said, no, that seems silly. I see people with bumper stickers that say, just breathe.
Yeah,
that seems silly. And so I kind of wrote it off. But when I was going through Desert to Dawn, you have a section called the 4-7-8 breathing exercise. And I'll try everything once. And I thought, well, I'm going to try it. And that has started to become a serious part of my morning routine. So much so that on my computer monitor, it has the numbers 4-7-8, just as a reminder before I turn my computer on to just take a minute or two and get my head right. And so I'm wrong. Michael, I was wrong on breathing exercises. And so can you talk about, to all the naysayers out there, or what has been your experience with breathing exercises and how they fit into the whole wellness scope?
I would love to. And hey, David, don't give yourself a hard time on that, because it only took you 2 people saying it. They always say third time's the charm. So you learned it quick, actually.
That's right. That's right.
I want to take y'all back to, what is the first thing when a child is born, when a baby is born? What's the first thing they do when they enter into the world? They take a breath. So our breath is really our most powerful piece of nourishment that we can possibly have. And it's available to everyone, right? And so what we do with our breath really controls the whole body. It's the one thing that we're bringing into our system consistently throughout the whole day. So learning to manage the breath is incredibly important. And eventually, again, like the brain, because our breath is controlled by our brain, eventually it becomes a rhythm that you don't have to think about. So when you can start, you've done a great job of even putting the reminder on your computer. Like eventually, when you sit down, it'll become automatic. Or eventually when you have, a situation that you encounter with business or relationships or whatever that you encounter that may raise the hair on your head, that can become your automatic first go-to with a pause, right? Because often we need to pause when we encounter challenges. We talked about that reactivity versus proactivity. So the pause with the breath is truly essential because it brings clarity and it brings a place where you can respond well. So I just think it's something that was, natural to us as human beings, that's the first thing we come to and the first thing we need when we come out of our mothers. And I just think that when we attend to our breath, again, it's another tool that is right here with us. It's not difficult. It's just reminding yourself to do it long enough that it becomes a natural response in your life. And so there's just so much power in it. The 4-7-8 breath is a great relaxing breath, kind of sets the tone. When I was having a lot of anxiety, and you would, for those that have experienced anxiety, a lot of times you just feel this kind of wave of pressure that kind of rises in your trunk, in your core. And it's really taking the breath away from the diaphragm. The diaphragm lays, down closer to your belly button. And when anxiety comes over the body, all the breath is really just up in the head. You don't get any breath down into your core. And when there's nothing going into your core, there's no physical grounding that's going on. You're just kind of lifted and floating around. And when we're not grounded and stable, again, we cannot reach out and do the things we need to do in the world when we're floating. So I like to use that analogy for those that are familiar with how anxiety does feel within the body. The breath is your first go-to to really calm those events, that cascade of events, that fight or flight that happens within the body. So the breath is really powerful, really powerful.
Yeah, I'm a believer. I'm a believer in it now. You've made me a believer. So moving on. So your book lays out a 40-day journey of inspiration, prayer, and reflection. What about Desert to Dawn is different than, say, other devotional type programs?
Well, I think the writer is different. I hope one of the things that all your awesome listeners are going to take away from this time we've spent together is just that we all have our uniqueness and we all have unique stories and life experiences that are meaningful. And some people choose to share more of their life experiences, but truly our stories are a beautiful connection point for other people. And I think that, when we connect with people, it weaves a beautiful fabric of community, and we're more of a life force, and we can be more impactful when we connect in community. So I really feel like this book is a unique perspective on health. It's a neat perspective on faith, and it's, my hard-earned experience. And so I think the reader that is interested in looking at more their mind and their body, they can gain pearls of wisdom from this book. I think the reader that may be interested in more growth, within Christian spirituality, they will gain a lot from this book. I think someone who wants to progress and find more purpose in their life, the sequence of the book actually takes you from a place of openness and surrender to transformation, to integration, to purpose throughout the 40 days. And so there's a lot of deep self-discovery that can occur when you do the 40-day journey. So depending upon what a person's needs are when they come to this book, I'm hoping that they will find answers. It'll meet them where they are in their journeys and give them, just one or two takeaways that they can bring into their life that will hopefully be life-giving and give them something that brings a new level of peace, a new level of joy within their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, I am on, I believe, day 16 and am really liking it so far. And one thing that I didn't anticipate this, but my wife and I have been doing it together. Once all the kids are in bed, we'll go through it. And it's really prompted a lot of great conversation and probably prompt some questions that we wouldn't otherwise be asking each other. And so it's been, my only complaint is sometimes we'll stay up till midnight talking and we're tired the next day. But anyway, I have really enjoyed up until day 16 and am looking forward to completing this. So anyway, anything else we want to touch on before we get into the fire round?
Well, I did want to share one other thing I forgot to mention about the book, David. I'm thrilled to hear that you and your wife are enjoying it, because I think, again, we talk about conversation being the catalyst for growth. It is. And I think when we can share with one another, it's empowering to the other person and empowering to the person that's sharing as well. You'll notice in the 40 days that each day has a different word that's the focus. And that really spawned from a practice that I took up about 8 years ago. And instead of choosing resolutions at the beginning of the year, I started to choose a word for a year. And it's been the most fun practice because I've seen so many different things evolve from it. And it really stems from being, really open to a lot of different possibilities within your life. And it's been intentional. And this year, my word is courage, just to share. And I have to share with you guys this little story. I went and delivered one of my books to one of my writing instructors from about 5 or 6 years ago. And we were just talking about different life-giving practices. And she opened the book. And she opened the book, she just wanted to kind of see, some of the artwork in it. And she opened the book to day 3. And she said, "Oh my goodness, I just love this artwork on this page. It reminds me of you." Well, that word for day 3 is courage. And so it was such an aha moment for us because, I thought, what are the odds that out of 123 pages in a book, she's going to open to the word courage and then really attune and, make note of the word, and that would be my word for this year. So anyway, I hope that as people are also reading the book, that they will think about which words really resonate with them. And maybe it's a word that they need more of in their life, and so that's something that you can embrace and move forward with if there's one of those in your 40-day journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really like that. All right, Ken, let's turn it over to you for the fire round.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Catherine, are you ready for the fire round?
I think so. Should I be?
All right. Well, what is your favorite book?
That's a tough question for me. I would have to say a book called Gift from the Sea by Anne Morrow Lindbergh. And she wrote this book back in 1955. And it just has so much wisdom in it. And there's a lot of reflections from the sea. You guys may have noticed that I really value, how nature is reflective of the human soul. And this book was really enlightening to me, and it inspired me a lot as an author and as a female. So that would have to be my favorite book. But I usually have about 10 books sitting on my bedside. And depending upon my mood, we'll read some fiction or something that's a little more educational. So I love to read.
Awesome. Very cool. What are your hobbies?
Well, that's also pretty varied. I like to tell people that I swim now so that I can run. I turned 50 years old this year, and I've run pretty much my whole life, and I love the freedom it brings and being outdoors. But as I've gotten older, I've had to be more careful with, the orthopedic things. So I've taken up more swimming, which has been great. So I swim a lot, and I just enjoy creative projects. We enjoy doing things as a family, exploring out in nature, as much as my teen kids will do that with me now. I have a son that loves to fish, and so I enjoy going and being with him fishing. I'm not a great fisherwoman, but something I'm trying to learn more about. So I have lots of different hobbies. Most of them involve being outdoors, though.
Awesome. Very cool. Last one. What do you think sets apart successful people accomplishing lofty goals from those who give up, fail, or never get started?
Well, I have to say one thing. I think most successful people have encountered great obstacles and potentially had a few failures along their way. And I think it's important that when we have successes, that we also recognize the obstacles that we've overcome to get to that space. So I like to think of things in threes. I think successful people absolutely persevere. They absolutely persevere. I think successful people in a sense, become comfortable with obstacles, and they recognize that an obstacle is either a place where they are supposed to pause, or it may be a place where they need to look for other alternatives. So I think that often obstacles can be very helpful in our journeys, although many people see them as, a stopping point or a place to let go of something. I think it's actually a place where either we need to stop and recognize, the gifts of where we are, or again, looking at alternatives. And like we talked about earlier, I think that one of the keys with lofty goals, the word lofty in itself just, screams to the mountaintops. And I think that there's a lot of different steps that you take as you're journeying to the mountaintop. And some of those are rocky and some of them are really beautiful. And I just think that establishing those realistic goals along the way is incredibly important, because I think when we only look at the lofty goal, we can get overwhelmed. And I think most of us know that overwhelm can equal anxiety and can equal just going down a path that maybe is not going to serve you well or serve others well. So those are my three things I think that successful people really need to do.
Sure. What a great answer. And Catherine, definitely want to, so the fire round's over. You made it through.
Thank you. I'm feeling the water.
Awesome. I want to thank you for coming on the show and covering a topic that's often neglected in our space. And it's huge. It's very important. So really appreciate you sharing your story. To the listeners, go out and grab the book, Desert to Dawn, give it a read, check it out. And yeah, just really appreciate you coming on the show. David, do you want to close out the show?
Yeah, Catherine, if someone wants to get in touch with you for wellness coaching, what's the best way to do that?
They can email me directly. My email is creativesoul, which is SOLE, Charlotte @gmail.com. And I would love to, any of your listeners that are interested in having, a phone conversation or a video conference, I'd be delighted to meet with people and just listen to where they are in their space and see if it would be a good fit for me to work with them and see if we can journey together and make life feel more full and peaceful at the same time.
Well, excellent. Excellent. We will post links to all of that in the show notes. And like Ken said, be sure to get your copy of Desert to Dawn. We'll post a link to that on Amazon as well in the show notes. Catherine, I want to thank you for being a guest on the Firing the Man podcast and looking forward to staying in touch.
It's been great to be here. And really, I just want to leave everyone with this empowering thought. Each and every one of us was created to thrive.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's Firing the Man podcast. If you like this episode, head on over to firingtheman.com and check out our resource library for exclusive Firing the Man discounts on popular e-commerce subscription services. That is firingtheman.com/resource. You can also find a comprehensive library of over 50 books that Ken and I have read in the last few years that have made a meaningful impact on our business. For that, head on over to www.firingtheman.com/library. Lastly, check us out on social media at Firing the Man and on YouTube at Firing the Man for exclusive content. This is David Schilmer and Ken Will. We're out. Before you go, we wanted to share a new service that Ken and I have been using called Getita that has made us over $10,000 in Amazon reimbursements. The service requires no monthly subscription, and Getita collects a small percentage of the money they recover for you. It takes less than 5 minutes to set up and works on all Amazon marketplaces. Go to Getita.com, Getida.com, and enter promo code FTM400. That's FTM for Firing the Man 400 to get your first $400 in reimbursements commission free. How much money does Amazon owe you?